Delta 7, engage vector now, Captain Vrikol shouted, his words slicing through the digital symphony of the Aurora's command deck. The sharp clack of his gloved hand against the control panel resonated with purpose. Immediately, the starship shuddered as its advanced quantum propulsion systems ignited. A cascade of vibrant laser plasma displays dancing across the bridge in shifting hues of indigo and deep amber. Each display flickered with urgent patterns, as if reflecting the very heartbeat of the vessel, and every crew member felt the call to action vibrate through the sleek surfaces and responsive controls beneath their fingertips. Commander Rykol's eyes were fixed on his heads-up displays, where streams of encrypted data scrolled in intricate, almost hypnotic patterns. "Captain, we're receiving irregular transmissions from the quantum relay grid," he reported in a tone that combined analytical calm with a hint of apprehension. The digital symbols moved like cryptic hieroglyphs across his screen, each pulse a silent testament to an enemy force attempting to weave chaos into the Aurora's communication network. At his station, Lieutenant Dervin's fingers darted over his console, ensuring every secure channel remained uncompromised. His face, illuminated by the cool glow of the laser plasma displays, betrayed both steadfast focus and an undercurrent of unease. In the engineering bay, the environment exuded a clinical crispness. A sterile aroma mingled with the subtle tang of ionized air. Chief Mechanic Brannock and Ensign Solon were immersed in a flurry of activity around diagnostic modules. "Our systems remain stable, but those transmissions are unsettling our network in ways we haven't encountered before," Brannock observed, his voice measured and deliberate. His calloused hands moved confidently over the controls, each tap and click a counterpoint to the distant electronic pulses echoing through the bay. Ensign Solon, eager yet attentive, recorded every anomaly with a seriousness that belied his youth. Further along, Dr. Zenoff absorbed streams of astrophysical data on his laser plasma displays, which projected spectral bands and subtle gravitational fluctuations in mesmerizing detail. "Captain, sensor readings indicate an unusual energy pattern near Sector 12, he stated, his voice a blend of scientific inquiry and cautious warning. "It appears our adversary is exploiting a vulnerability in our quantum communications network, disturbing our operational cadence." His words, deliberate and heavy with implication, hinted at a strategy both intricate and perilous. Captain Vrikol strode to the central command station, his presence a commanding force amid the mounting tension. Pausing to study the luminous arrays that depicted both the silent majesty of space and the creeping threat within its depths, he declared, "We face an enemy that masks its intent behind streams of encrypted data, infiltrating our channels with calculated malice. They may think their digital artifice is impenetrable, but we will not allow our network to be subverted." His tone was firm, each syllable weighted with the legacy of past battles and the unyielding spirit of human innovation. Beyond the reinforced observation window, the cosmos unfurled in a spectacular display of radiant phenomena. Stars glimmered with an almost tangible brilliance, their light scattering in shimmering trails across the darkness, while swirling nebulae of crimson and violet provided an awe-inspiring counterpoint to the high-tech interior of the ship. The cool, smooth surfaces underfoot and the subtle vibration of the vessel imparted a tactile reassurance amid the sensory overload. The gentle pressure of the ship's structure under the crew's feet grounded them in the reality of their mission. Every detail, from the crisp taste of recycled air tinged with sterile freshness to the visual cascade of dynamic digital information, converged into an experience that was both immersive and profoundly stirring. Captain Vrikol absorbed every piece of analysis with measured deliberation. "Let us convert their strategy into our strength," he declared, his voice fusing resolve with inventive daring. "Our advantage lies not merely in our sophisticated armaments, but in our ability to outthink and outmaneuver those who dare to challenge us." His declaration was both an assertion of human capability and a promise that the ingenuity of the crew would shine through, even amid the covert chaos of enemy interference. As the Aurora surged forward, its course meticulously charted through the digital storm, the bridge transformed into a crucible of human determination. Every sensor reading, every responsive keystroke, and every calculated maneuver spoke of a legacy steeped in courage and tactical brilliance. The enemy, hidden behind layers of encoded data, had initiated a challenge, a gauntlet thrown into the silent void. And in that charged moment, Captain Vrikol and his crew stood united, prepared to transform uncertainty into a demonstration of human resolve. The digital storm raged on outside. Each burst of encrypted interference met with a swift, resolute reply from the Aurora's systems. In that silent, dynamic theater of light and code, every command and every response became a step toward an uncertain future, a future where the ingenuity of humankind would rise to meet the enigmatic designs of a formidable foe. The stage was set, and the first act of this grand confrontation had begun, echoing across the boundless corridors of data and determination. The bridge pulsed with a quiet, razor-sharp intensity. The enemy had yet to reveal themselves, yet the Aurora's sensors pulsed with encrypted interference, weaving like phantom tendrils across their communications grid. Every flicker on the laser plasma displays told a story of something moving just out of reach, as if their adversary was testing them, pushing, probing, waiting for a mistake. Captain Vrikol stood rigid, his gaze fixed on the shifting patterns cascading across the primary heads-up display. The interference was adapting. Subtle distortions in the data streams now mirrored their own encryption techniques, as if the enemy was learning them in real time. A low exhale escaped him. "They're not just listening," he murmured, voice edged with steel. "They're studying us." Commander Reichel's fingers twitched over his console, feeding the ship's countermeasures into the computational matrix. "Then we make their education costly," he said, his words clipped, calculated. "We're still in control of the tempo. They may know how to disrupt, but let's see if they know how to adapt." Lieutenant Dervin's hands moved with controlled urgency across his display, reconfiguring their data pathways. His brow furrowed, the dim glow of the monitors casting his face in shifting shades of blue. "I'm rerouting encrypted relays through subspace redundancies. If they try mirroring us again, we'll loop their own interference back at them." From his station, Dr. Zenov let out a slow breath, eyes locked onto the patterns shifting within the deep space analysis grid. "That's assuming they operate within our spectrum of logic," he murmured. "We're thinking in terms of deception and counter-deception. But what if that isn't their strategy? What if they aren't just here to disrupt?" He adjusted his display, fine-tuning the spectral wavelengths. "They're leading us somewhere." "They were never hiding," Zenov murmured. "They were waiting for us to find them." A pulse of energy rippled outward from the enemy's lead vessel, not as an attack, but as a message. A single, sharp burst of data fed directly into their sensor array. Vrikol didn't need the translation software to understand it. "We see you." The bridge's atmosphere thickened, every breath drawn slower, more measured. There was no panic, only the steady realization that whatever they had assumed about this adversary had been incorrect. Vrikol didn't hesitate. "Fire the EMP." Commander Reichel executed the command, the Aurora's energy capacitors unleashing a surge of electromagnetic disruption that expanded in a perfectly calculated wave. The pulse hit the enemy fleet like a silent explosion, crackling arcs of interference latching onto their network, fracturing it. But the fleet didn't stutter, didn't break formation. Instead, they absorbed it. The bridge went still. "Impossible," Dervin breathed. "They should be." "They adapted," Zenov finished grimly. "They were expecting the EMP." A cold realization settled over Vrikol. They weren't just facing an opponent, they were facing something that learned. Reichel was already shifting tactics, recalibrating weapon systems, switching to kinetic armaments. Dervin's display flared with incoming data spikes. "Captain, they're feeding pulses back into our sensor arrays. Not jamming. Something else. Something more refined." Brannick's voice cut through the tension from engineering. "They're pushing heat into our secondary grid. It's not an overload, not an attack. It's mapping." Vrikol understood. The enemy wasn't reacting. They were watching, studying. Their every response was being cataloged, tested. His jaw clenched. "They think they're learning how we fight." Zenov turned from his display, his face pale in the shifting glow of the laser plasma screens. What if they already have? Silence gripped the bridge. Vrikol looked at the void beyond the reinforced glass. The enemy ship sat motionless, waiting, calculating. Something about their stance felt wrong. Not hesitation, not caution, anticipation. Vrikol's voice was quiet when he finally spoke. They're not here to fight us. He exhaled sharply. They're here to evolve. The heads-up displays flickered with another pulse of data from the enemy fleet. Another message. Show us more. The bridge remained deathly still. The Aurora had not yet fired a single shot beyond the EMP. The enemy had every opportunity to strike, and yet they had not. Commander Vrikol's hands hovered over the targeting controls. Captain, what are your orders? Vrikol didn't answer immediately. The pieces were forming in his mind, snapping into place with unsettling clarity. They're letting us choose, he muttered. The bridge remained frozen, every officer waiting for the decision that would define the course of the battle. Vrikol exhaled. He had no choice. He would give them something to learn from. Re-engage weapons, lock onto their lead ship. He straightened. Let's teach them something they won't survive. The enemy fleet loomed on the laser plasma displays, motionless, patient. Their ships, dark voids against the stars, absorbed light rather than reflected it, distorting their silhouettes into something that felt unnatural, like holes punctured into reality itself. Captain Vrikol knew this wasn't a standstill. It was a calculation. They were letting him decide how the engagement would unfold. A choice, but one weighted with unseen consequences. Target their lead ship, Vrikol ordered, his voice smooth but unyielding. Commander Vrikol's hands moved fluidly over the control interface. Target locked. The ship's weapon systems cycled through their configurations, the kinetic armaments shifting into engagement status. The Aurora's frame vibrated subtly as energy built within the launch capacitors. Lieutenant Dervin didn't look up from his console, his fingers gliding over controls. They're not counterlocking, no defensive posturing, no energy surges. They're watching. Then let's give them something to remember. Vrikol exhaled sharply. Fire! A concussive force rippled through the ship's structure as the Aurora's forward artillery discharged. Hypersonic slugs ignited against the cold void, their ionized trails vanishing into the vacuum. The kinetic rounds tore through space, closing the distance to the lead enemy ship in seconds. They should have struck dead center, should have splintered hull plating, sent shockwaves reverberating through the ship's structure. Instead, the slugs vanished. Not absorbed, not deflected. Simply gone. Vrikol's display flared red. They phased out. Not possible, Dervin muttered, rapidly reconfiguring the ship's sensor algorithms. Quantum displacement? Gravitational displacement? This isn't standard cloaking. This is something else. Vrikol stared at the laser plasma display, watching the enemy vessel as if willing it to explain itself. It hadn't dodged. It hadn't even reacted. It had simply ceased to exist in one place and appeared somewhere else, impossibly seamless, beyond any known technology. Then the retaliation began. The lead ship pulsed once. A ripple, nearly imperceptible, moved outward from its frame. The Aurora's sensor arrays lit up in a storm of false readings and distorted signals. The air itself seemed to press against Vrikol's skin, though he knew that was impossible. Dr. Zenov's voice cut through the static-laced bridge. They aren't firing on us. They're rewriting how we perceive them. The realization hit like a hammer. They weren't attacking the Aurora's hull. They were attacking its ability to understand reality. Captain? Brannock's voice crackled through the intercom from engineering, thick with urgency. Our targeting systems are recalibrating on their own, like they're questioning their own data. Vrikol turned sharply. Questioning? Like second-guessing, Brannock elaborated. The targeting matrix keeps shifting coordinates, trying to correct something that isn't wrong. It's almost like our ship doesn't trust itself anymore. A cold, heavy silence settled over the bridge. That was what the enemy was doing. They weren't just scrambling signals or deploying countermeasures. They were creating doubt. Vrikol swore under his breath. This isn't a fight. It's an experiment. Vrikol clenched his jaw. They were playing into the enemy's hands, feeding them more information, more reactions, more attempts to break the pattern. If this continued, the Aurora wouldn't just lose the engagement, it would lose its ability to comprehend the battle at all. "Shut down external tracking systems," he ordered. "Manual controls only, no digital recalibration." Vrikol hesitated, but only for a second. "Understood." Dervin exhaled sharply, fingers moving with practiced precision. "Blindfolding ourselves in the middle of a battlefield. Not a strategy I'd recommend, Captain. Not blindfolding, cutting the leash." Vrikol's gaze darkened. "They've been feeding off every automated process we rely on. If we stop thinking like machines, we stop playing by their rules." Zinov's brow furrowed. "Captain, even if we go fully manual, they've already gathered vast amounts of information on how we respond to threats. That data still exists. Then we give them something they didn't expect." The next order came fast. "Brannock, reroute auxiliary power through redundant circuits. I want fluctuating energy readings across the entire ship. Make us look unstable." A brief pause. Then Brannock's voice crackled back. "You're masking us?" "Yes. If they're studying us, let's make them study the wrong thing." Brannock let out a short, approving grunt. "On it." The Aurora's energy signatures began to flicker irregularly, fluctuating between excess output and near-silent operation. The ship's stabilizers adjusted dynamically, creating an illusion of instability. Dervin tapped into the falsified data loops. "On their sensors, we should look like we're failing, drifting out of control." The enemy fleet held its position, watching, waiting. And then they moved. Not all at once, not in any predictable pattern. The ships fragmented into clusters, breaking formation, each vessel repositioned in a staggered asymmetrical configuration, as if adjusting their own perspective of the Aurora's disruption. Vrikol exhaled, low and sharp. "They're recalculating." "Now we see if they can make mistakes," Vrikol murmured. The moment stretched. Then, an opportunity appeared, a brief desynchronization in their network, so minute that even their advanced systems hadn't accounted for it. A tiny fraction of unpredictability. Vrikol saw it first. "Right flank, second row. Lead ship lost sync for half a second." It was enough. Vrikol acted immediately. "Target and fire, no hesitation." The Aurora's artillery roared to life. Hypersonic slugs tore through the fabricated silence of space, unburdened by digital overcorrection. The rounds closed in, and this time they struck. The enemy vessel didn't vanish. It reacted too late. The kinetic force smashed through its hull, and for the first time one of the alien ships faltered. It staggered within its formation, flickering, its structure bending in unnatural ways as if resisting the damage. A ripple of movement spread through the fleet, subtle but unmistakable. A reaction. They had not expected this. Dervin's voice was hushed but triumphant. "They didn't see it coming." Zenov leaned forward, watching the readings shift. "They're not omniscient. They can be outmaneuvered." Vrikol's lips curved into something cold. "Then let's do it again." Before the enemy could reconfigure, the Aurora fired once more, capitalizing on the single moment of weakness. The second impact tore deeper, sending visible fractures through the alien vessel's hull. This time, it didn't flicker away. It burned. Vrikol exhaled. "So they can bleed." Vrikol's fingers curled into a fist. The enemy had played their game long enough. Now it was time to show them that humans had mastered the art of adaptation long before they had arrived. They thought we were their experiment. He took in the fractured enemy vessel, its ruined remains spiraling into nothingness. His voice was steady, cold. "Now, they're ours." The ruined alien vessel spiraled into the void, its fractured hull unraveling in jagged shards. The glow of its internal systems flickered erratically, fighting against the inevitable. The Aurora had drawn blood, and now the enemy knew it. A ripple passed through the remaining fleet, subtle shifts in their formation, like a collective inhale before an exhale that had yet to come. For the first time they hesitated. Vrikol didn't waste it. "Dervin, flood the battle grid with false signals," he ordered. stepping forward as his eyes swept across the shifting data on the heads-up display. Make them doubt their own calculations. Dervin's hands were already in motion, altering the encrypted transmission bursts the Aurora emitted into the battlefield. The enemy had relied on pattern recognition, adapting to every piece of information fed to them. So now, the humans would feed them poison, misleading trajectories, falsified energy spikes, erratic movement cues. They won't know what's real and what's misdirection, Dervin confirmed, voice taut with focus. I'll layer distortions across multiple bandwidths, force them to second-guess their own algorithms. Commander Rykal leaned over his console, fingers poised. We'll need to synchronize weapons fire with the distortions. Hit them where they think we aren't. Vrykal gave a sharp nod. Brannock, how much power can we reroute to maneuvering thrusters without compromising main weapons? Brannock's reply crackled through the bridge speakers. If I cycle auxiliary reserves between each burst, we can get 3 rapid repositioning maneuvers before we overload the stabilizers. Make it happen. Vrykal turned back toward the primary display where the alien fleet was still recalibrating. Xenov, break down their movement. Are they reacting as a unit, or is there a lag between ships? Xenov's narrowed gaze flicked between analytical feeds, fingers scrolling through layers of real-time data. There's a desynchronization interval, he said, voice shifting into something edged with realization. Their coordination isn't instantaneous. There's a half-second gap between command signal and execution. Rykal exhaled sharply. Half a second is enough. Vrykal's expression darkened as the pieces fell into place. We stagger our strikes between those intervals. Make them collide with their own hesitation. The plan took shape, not as a frantic scramble, but as a deliberate unraveling of the enemy's advantage. Brannock rerouted the Aurora's power distribution, creating a volatile but controlled energy loop that allowed for unpredictable thruster bursts. Dervin layered false signals into the enemy's grid, creating chimeric echoes of movement, flickering threats that didn't exist. Rykal coordinated weapon fire to exploit the desynchronization lag, aiming not where the enemy was, but where they would be an instant later. And all the while, the alien fleet adjusted. They shifted formations, adapting to the interference, recalibrating their approach. But Vrykal wasn't waiting to see how well they learned. Execute the first strike! The Aurora launched forward with a burst of raw force, breaking free of its prior trajectory in an abrupt maneuver that sent inertial dampeners straining. Before the enemy could process the deviation, the ship's kinetic batteries roared, slugs streaking through the darkness, in a staggered sequence. The first wave struck nothing but empty space, an expected failure. The second wave clipped the leading edges of a responding ship's hull, sending fractures rippling across its surface. But the third tore through a midline vessel, hitting just as the ship was repositioning, forcing it into a collision path with its own retreating unit. 2 alien warships crashed against one another in a silent, crushing impact. Vrykal watched as one ship's structure bent inward, its core struggling to compensate for the unanticipated force. The Aurora hadn't just damaged them, it had made them damage themselves. Dervin let out a breath that wasn't quite relief. They're still trying to correct. Their formation is restructuring. Then we don't stop. Vrykal's voice was steady, weighted. Keep feeding them chaos. Xenov's display pulsed with new energy readings. Captain, they're redirecting focus. We've pushed them into a defensive posture. Rykal's fingers tightened against the console. Good. Let's make it worse. The battle became an orchestrated sequence of misdirection and brutality. Every weapon fired was coordinated with a deception, every maneuver layered with unpredictability. The enemy ships that had once moved with eerie cohesion were now faltering, adjusting just slightly too late. Brannock's voice cut through the momentary lull. Captain, one of their vessels is moving outside formation, not retreating. Something else. Vrykal's gaze snapped to the display, where a single ship was veering away from the others. It wasn't damaged. It wasn't lagging behind. It was leaving the battlefield. Dervin caught it too. It's transmitting something. Xenov adjusted the sensor parameters, isolating the ship's data output. The answer made his breath hitch. They're sending real-time combat logs. Rykol's expression hardened. They're broadcasting everything they've learned from this fight. Rykol's stomach twisted. This wasn't about winning. This was about replication. They never intended to defeat us, he realized. They just needed to understand us. The enemy ship picked up speed, slipping beyond the Aurora's engagement range. A calculated escape. One ship would be enough. Enough to carry the data. Enough to inform whatever force lurked behind this fleet. Vrikol's decision was instant. Dervin, cut their transmission frequency, now. I can jam it, but I can't erase what's already been sent, Dervin warned, fingers moving frantically. Brannock's voice was sharp. Then we take out the messenger. Rykol was already moving. Target locked, firing. The Aurora's artillery discharged in a relentless burst, tracking the retreating ship with brutal efficiency, but it wasn't fast enough. The enemy vessel flared with an energy surge, then it was gone. Not destroyed, not disabled. It simply vanished, slipping beyond their reach in an instant. Silence swallowed the bridge. They've got a failsafe, Zenov murmured, his gaze distant. They were never fighting to win. Vrikol's hands curled into fists. The battle was over, but the war had just begun. The enemy hadn't been bested. They had been fed exactly what they wanted. Every strategy the Aurora had employed. Every adaptation. Every human response to an unknown threat. It had all been absorbed, catalogued, sent to whatever intelligence lurked behind those ships. Rykol's voice was quiet but firm. They'll come back, and next time they won't be learning. Vrikol exhaled, slow, measured. No, he agreed. Next time, they'll be ready. The bridge remained still, each officer absorbing the weight of what had transpired. The Aurora had fought, had outmaneuvered, had struck a blow that no one else had managed. And yet, the enemy had left with the only victory they had needed. Data, knowledge, understanding, the kind that couldn't be undone. Dervin finally broke the silence. What's our move, Captain? Vrikol's gaze lingered on the battlefield, where broken enemy ships still drifted, ghosts of a conflict that had meant nothing in the long game. We change the way we fight, he said, voice low. We make sure that when they return, they'll find an enemy they never expected. The Aurora turned away from the wreckage, engines burning a new course into the unknown. This was no longer about a single battle. The Aurora cut through the dark like a silent predator, its hull reflecting the distant glow of broken wreckage left in its wake. The enemy had fled, not in defeat, but in triumph, carrying with them the most valuable prize of all, knowledge. The humans had won a battle, but in doing so, they had revealed everything. Every countermeasure, every adaptation, every choice made in the chaos of war had been absorbed, studied, and sent to something far greater. Captain Vrikol stood at the command station, his hands resting against the cool surface of his console. He didn't need to see the data scrolling across the laser plasma displays to understand the situation. The silence on the bridge told him everything. The crew knew it too. They had been tested, dissected, and left alive only because their adversary had deemed them worth further study. The thought burned. Commander Rykol's voice broke the quiet, low, and deliberate. We exposed too much. Lieutenant Dervin let out a breath, his fingers tightening around the control module. We didn't just show them how we fight. We showed them how we think. Dr. Zenov, his usual clinical detachment barely masking his concern, spoke from his station. They'll evolve beyond what we face today. The next time we see them, they won't hesitate. They won't probe for weaknesses. They'll arrive knowing exactly how to tear us apart. Vrikol's fingers curled against the console. He had seen wars won and lost through strategy, through sheer firepower, through attrition. This was something else, a war of adaptation, fought in data and tactics before the first shot was ever fired. And humanity had just given the enemy everything they needed to build the perfect countermeasure. Unless they changed. Unless they became something the enemy could never predict. Brannock's voice crackled through the bridge intercom. Captain, I've got system diagnostics running. Hull integrity solid, weapon reserve stable. We took a hit, but we're still standing. He hesitated, then added, Just say the word, and we'll be ready when they come back. That was the problem. If they simply waited, if they let the enemy return on its own terms, they would lose. The Aurora had been unpredictable once. Now it was just another variable, an equation already solved. Vrikol turned from the command station, his gaze sweeping across the bridge. The faces that looked back at him weren't filled with fear or uncertainty. They were waiting for direction, for a path forward. We rewrite the rules. His voice was steady, sharp as a blade. We erase the battle they recorded today. We become something they cannot model, cannot analyze, something they never expected. Zenov studied him carefully. And how exactly do we do that, Captain? Vrikol's eyes gleamed with something colder than fury. We take the fight to them. A shift passed through the bridge, subtle yet undeniable. Vrikol's head tilted slightly, considering. Dervin's hand stilled over his controls, tension coiled in his stance. Even Zenov, the scientist who dissected war with equations and logic, narrowed his eyes, interest flickering in their depths. Dervin spoke first, voice careful. You're suggesting we chase an enemy we barely understand, one that already has the upper hand? The enemy vessel flared with an energy surge, then it was gone. Not destroyed, not disabled. It simply vanished, slipping beyond their reach in an instant. Silence swallowed the bridge. They've got a failsafe, Zenov murmured, his gaze distant. They were never fighting to win. Vrikol's hands curled into fists. The battle was over, but the war had just begun. The enemy hadn't been bested. They had been fed exactly what they wanted. Every strategy the Aurora had employed, every adaptation, every human response to an unknown threat. It had all been absorbed, catalogued, sent to whatever intelligence lurked behind those ships. Vrikol's voice was quiet but firm. They'll come back, and next time they won't be learning. Vrikol exhaled, slow, measured. No, he agreed. Next time, they'll be ready. The bridge remained still, each officer absorbing the weight of what had transpired. The Aurora had fought, had outmaneuvered, had struck a blow that no one else had managed. And yet, the enemy had left with the only victory they had needed. Data, knowledge, understanding, the kind that couldn't be undone. Dervin finally broke the silence. What's our move, Captain? Vrikol's gaze lingered on the battlefield, where broken enemy ships still drifted, ghosts of a conflict that had meant nothing in the long game. We change the way we fight, he said, voice low. We make sure that when they return, they'll find an enemy they never expected. The Aurora turned away from the wreckage, engines burning a new course into the unknown. This was no longer about a single battle. The Aurora cut through the dark like a silent predator, its hull reflecting the distant glow of broken wreckage left in its wake. The enemy had fled, not in defeat, but in triumph, carrying with them the most valuable prize of all, knowledge. The humans had won a battle, but in doing so, they had revealed everything. Every countermeasure, every adaptation, every choice made in the chaos of war had been absorbed, studied, and sent to something far greater. Captain Vrikol stood at the command station, his hands resting against the cool surface of his console. He didn't need to see the data scrolling across the laser plasma displays to understand the situation. The silence on the bridge told him everything. The crew knew it too. They had been tested, dissected, and left alive only because their adversary had deemed them worth further study. The thought burned. Commander Vrikol's voice broke the quiet, low, and deliberate. We exposed too much. Lieutenant Dervin let out a breath, his fingers tightening around the control module. We didn't just show them how we fight. We showed them how we think. Dr. Zenov, his usual clinical detachment barely masking his concern, spoke from his station. They'll evolve beyond what we face today. The next time we see them, they won't hesitate. They won't probe for weaknesses. They'll arrive knowing exactly how to tear us apart. Vrikol's fingers curled against the console. He had seen wars won and lost through strategy, through sheer firepower, through attrition. This was something else, a war of adaptation, fought in data and tactics before the first shot was ever fired. and humanity had just given the enemy everything they needed to build the perfect countermeasure. Unless they changed. Unless they became something the enemy could never predict. Brannick's voice crackled through the bridge intercom. "Captain, I've got system diagnostics running. Hull integrity solid, weapon reserve stable. We took a hit, but we're still standing." He hesitated, then added, "Just say the word, and we'll be ready when they come back." That was the problem. If they simply waited, if they let the enemy return on its own terms, they would lose. The Aurora had been unpredictable once. Now it was just another variable, an equation already solved. Vrikol turned from the command station, his gaze sweeping across the bridge. The faces that looked back at him weren't filled with fear or uncertainty. They were waiting for direction, for a path forward. "We rewrite the rules." His voice was steady, sharp as a blade. "We erase the battle they recorded today. We become something they cannot model, cannot analyze, something they never expected." Zenoff studied him carefully. "And how exactly do we do that, Captain?" Vrikol's eyes gleamed with something colder than fury. "We take the fight to them." A shift passed through the bridge, subtle yet undeniable. Vrikol's head tilted slightly, considering. Dervin's hand stilled over his controls, tension coiled in his stance. Even Zenoff, the scientist who dissected war with equations and logic, narrowed his eyes, interest flickering in their depths. Dervin spoke first, voice careful. "You're suggesting we chase an enemy we barely understand, one that already has the upper hand?" "No," Vrikol corrected. "I'm saying we make sure they never have it again." Vrikol's lips pressed together. Then he exhaled slowly. "You want to turn this into our experiment?" Vrikol's jaw tightened. They left thinking they'd mapped the human response, that we're something predictable, a species that plays by rules. We make sure that assumption is the biggest mistake they ever make. Brannick's voice cut in from engineering, rough but steady. "So we become the ones they can't define." "Exactly." Vrikol turned toward the navigation console. "Dervin, plot every trajectory that ship could have taken after it disappeared. Trace their movement, follow the signal decay from their transmission. I want every possible destination they could have reached." Dervin didn't question it. His fingers flew over the controls, the display shifting into intricate paths of theoretical flight patterns, gravitational influence markers, and subspace disruptions. "They masked their departure, but we can still chase the echoes," he muttered, adjusting the variables. "We won't find their exact location, but we can narrow the field." Zenoff adjusted his display, running calculations against the gathered data. They didn't just retreat blindly. They had a destination. And if they had one, it means there's more of them. His voice dropped. "Maybe even something far worse." Vrikol's gaze didn't waver. "Good. Then we won't have to search long." Vrikol leaned back slightly, studying the captain with an expression that was neither resistance nor hesitation. Just calculation. "You know what this means," he said quietly. "This isn't defense anymore. This is war." Vrikol's eyes locked onto his. "It always was. We just didn't see it yet." The bridge settled into a different kind of silence. Not uncertainty, not fear. Something sharper, a shift in understanding. They weren't just a lone warship navigating the edges of a conflict anymore. They were standing at the beginning of something greater. Brannick's voice returned, lower now, as if acknowledging that shift. "Then we're going to need every ounce of power this ship can give. I'll start reconfiguring energy distribution. Make sure we can sustain long-term pursuit." Dervin added, "I'll keep our signal masked. If we track them, we need to be ghosts in their systems, not a broadcasted threat." Zenoff nodded, glancing back at his display. "I'll map the astrophysical conditions of every possible destination. If there's a pattern to their movement, we'll find it." Vrikol straightened, rolling his shoulders once before cracking a tight smirk. "And I'll make sure that when we do find them, they don't get another chance to leave." Vrikol let the moment settle, felt the weight of it press against his chest. This was the part of war that no one prepared for. Not the first battle, but the moment after, when the path ahead stretched into something unknown, something infinite. Humanity had been underestimated before, countless times, and every time it had rewritten its story, forged something greater from the ashes left behind. This was no different. His fingers curled into a fist against the console. We will not be their study. We will not be their test. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the bridge like a blade. They wanted to see how we think. Now they'll see what we do when we're finished thinking. The Aurora pivoted, the engines surging to life. The wreckage of the battlefield drifted behind them, forgotten. Ahead, the unknown stretched, filled with unseen enemies and unanswered questions. But for the first time, Captain Vrykol wasn't waiting for war to come to him. He was bringing it to them. And this time, the lesson wouldn't be survival. Activate the decoy array, now. Commander Draven Koren's command cut through the controlled chaos of the Resolute's bridge. His tone was firm yet measured, echoing through the secure channels as every officer scrambled to translate his intent into action. In the dim light of the cockpit, laser plasma displays flickered with streams of data. Each pulse and color shift a silent herald of imminent conflict. Draven's eyes, sharp and calculating, roved over the heads-up displays that lined the curved console. They revealed a dance of shifting vectors and energy patterns in the darkness outside, a ballet of light and motion orchestrated by the enemy. Though space itself offered no sound, the bridge was alive with the rhythmic cadence of alert signals, the soft clicks of control panels, and the occasional controlled exhale of a crew member bracing for what lay ahead. "Coordinates confirmed," intoned Joran Malik, tactical commander, his voice steady as he manipulated the digital overlays. "Our sensors show an irregular pulse pattern. Enemy warships are assembling in a formation that suggests calculated movement rather than random aggression." His words were precise, laced with the gravity of a man who had spent years refining battle simulations that now unfolded in real time. Tavian Rusk, the lead pilot, leaned forward from his station. He felt the subtle vibration underfoot, a reminder that while the vacuum of space offered no audible roar, the ship itself thrummed with kinetic energy. "I'm lining up the fighter arrays. These decoys will have them chasing shadows. Our adversaries won't know which target to lock onto," he said, his tone brisk and tinged with excitement. The cool touch of the control console under his fingertips grounded him as he mentally prepared for the rapid maneuvers he was about to execute. Soren Veld, the chief engineer, checked his instrument panel, his gaze flickering between the laser plasma displays and the intricate schematic projections on his heads-up display. "Electromagnetic interference systems are primed," he reported. "We're about to unleash a burst that will scramble their digital communication protocols. I'm adjusting the output to exploit the natural void. No sound travels out there, but our interference will be a visible storm to their sensors." His words conveyed a confidence rooted in scientific knowledge, and the soft, steady hum of his workbench monitors filled the brief pauses between commands. In the ambient light of the Resolute's command center, every surface exuded a cool, smooth quality, an almost tactile reminder of the ship's engineered design. The recycled atmosphere, sterile yet tinged with the faint zest of adrenaline and anticipation, enveloped the crew. Draven could almost taste the sharp tang of determination on his tongue as he surveyed the data, every sensor reading and visual cue forming a tapestry of tactical opportunity. The silence of space was deceptive. It masked a battlefield where every photon and charged particle carried meaning. Outside the reinforced viewport, the darkness was punctuated by bursts of radiant energy, a silent symphony of battle. Draven's mind raced as he considered the implications of each new blip on the laser plasma displays. The enemy, an armada of machine-driven warships, moved with methodical intent, their formation betraying an underlying pattern that hinted at a deeper, unspoken strategy. Yet their true plan remained shrouded, hidden behind layers of automated response protocols. "Commander, incoming sensor readout indicates a cluster approaching our flank," reported Helios Grimshaw, the communications officer, his voice calm despite the urgency. His fingers danced over the control interface, and the heads-up display flared with a fresh cascade of digital glyphs and figures. It appears they're attempting to outflank our decoy sequence. I suggest we recalibrate our interference burst to disrupt their newly forming vector. His suggestion was pragmatic, each word chosen to convey both immediacy and reason. A measured response that underscored the crew's commitment to adapting on the fly. Draven's gaze hardened. Noted, Helios. Joran, adjust the tactical matrix to accommodate a secondary defense perimeter. Tavian, prepare your fighter arrays for rapid redeployment. His command was clear, each directive a thread in the intricate web of strategy he was weaving. The Resolute was more than a warship. It was a fusion of scientific insight and human ingenuity, designed to exploit the very physics that governed the silent void.